Does it work? Okay, I'll try not to yell in the mic. That's always a challenge with these ones. Depending where you put them, then it's.
Yeah. That's how it worked in Los Angeles. Okay, they having starting troubles.
One you just did?
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good English. Like English. Oh, the Canadian one?
I'll tell you.
Yes. Yeah. But this is a drawback, right? Being in the far corner of the whole crop, right?
At 5 p.m.
5 p.m. Yeah. It's probably getting dark outside already.
People on.
I can tell you there are worse situations. Werner was speaking on the German pavilion this morning, just when there was a big, very big fuss. Plus, it was impossible to read the German pavilion. That super computer, which everything was great.
Yeah, because of the high level stuff.
There were 6 people. Luckily, they were
Is there a reception tonight? Here.
Now,
Farming.
that is a large part. I think I saw something around time saying.
Yeah, we'll see.
So, try it again when you open that up. Did it lose power? No, I'll see that. I'll find it fun. The Zoom's working. The Zoom's working. That's good.
And we're going to start with the video?
Yes.
Just started when we're ready.
Okay, let's go. Let's go now, yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. We're gonna start with this.
This is not good enough taking on the tram.
No, you have to go and get a special glass. Thanks for the tip.
I also learned yes recently. It doesn't work on the machine. But it would be nice if it were. You have to go and get your metrics.
Whether you live on the coast or the prairies, in the mountains or in the city, it is the ocean that is most critical for our climate and our future. More than 90% of ocean carbon is stored in the high seas, known as deep blue carbon. But this critical carbon-absorbing function is changing in ways that may impact climate forecasts. Without accurate forecasts, it is impossible to set effective climate policies. And the cost of incorrect policy could be devastating to our communities, the economy, and our planet. This urgent global crisis requires an integrated observing system, and a strategic place to start is with the North Atlantic Carbon Observatory, an initiative that will help us better understand the ocean's capacity to absorb carbon. But in order to succeed, nations must take leadership by committing consistent funding, dedicating human resources, and collaborating. The climate crisis does not wait. With a network of partners around the world, the Ocean Frontier Institute has the expertise and the strategy to turn investment into action. The North Atlantic Carbon Observatory will mobilize industry, nations, and environmental leaders to elevate ocean observation and take real climate action. Real action that makes a real difference for you and your communities.
Hey, thank you for the video and thank you for joining us at this event tonight. My name is Emmanuel Salmon. I'm the head of strategy and international cooperation with ICOS, the Integrated Carbon Observation System, and I have the pleasure to moderate this discussion tonight. So we have excellent panelists, including one who should be online, I hope. So we will start with Toste Tanhua, and then Anya Waite, then Wilfried Riggels, who will be speaking to us remotely, then Ed Hill and Antoine Petit. I will present them to you when they have their scene. Let's see if this works. I didn't have any rehearsal. This should move the slides, I guess. Yes, that's the proper one. You see our panelists, you see me, and why are we here? Well, because there is urgency. I think all of us know that. The role of the ocean in climate change is essential. We know that so far the ocean has taken up 30% of the emissions that have been absorbed, but we don't know if it's going to last. So alarmingly, and it's really an alarm, we don't know how the ocean will react in the future. And this, of course, calls for an urgent need of a global ocean observing system that will allow to understand better all the ocean carbon fluxes and then the role and the function of the ocean in climate change in the future. So there is an urgent need for more cooperation, and this is what our speakers are going to tell you about in a moment. So we will start with Dr. Tanhua. So Toste, you're senior scientist at GEOMAR, the Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Kiel, Germany, who was accepted as an admitted NGO yesterday by COP. Congratulations on this. You're a chemical oceanographer, and you focus on ocean ventilation and mixing in the ocean. You also work on understanding the dynamics of ocean carbon, nutrients, and oxygen. And you are also a co-chair of the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS, as well as coordinator of a crucial EU-funded project called EuroSea. So let's listen to what you will tell us. So this is this one. No, this one. Yeah.
So why do we need carbon observations? Well, I mean, it's Emmanuel, you already told you that currently about 25% of the emissions, the total emission that fossil fuel and land use change is taking up by the ocean. Looking at the historical time, it's actually how you look at that. It's more than 30% maybe of the total emission that's been taken up by the ocean. And this graphic here comes from Anya here, and it actually shows you where the observations of carbon are. You know, most of the observations are in land and atmosphere, and very few on the ocean, even though the ocean is just as a big player. And you see that here, there is actually much more carbon, 50 times more carbon in the ocean than is in the atmosphere. Why shouldn't we observe that better? And this is a little bit complicated picture, and I don't want you really to look at the details, but the main message here is we're looking at small perturbations, small changes in those big fluxes. That makes that a very difficult problem to accurately observe the change in carbon storage and also the carbon flux. And the second message is that we are looking at the change in inorganic carbon. This is driven by physics and chemistry. It's not biology. Biology might be more important in the future. It might be very important in the good management tool in the coastal areas. But 95% or so of the oceanic carbon uptake is inorganic carbon driven by physics and chemistry. And this is just a little bit of numbers here. And you can see here at 37,000 gigatons of carbon, not carbon dioxide, carbon, in the ocean. And you compare that to the 875, maybe it's 900 now, gigatons in the atmosphere. That's a big difference, right? And you look at what's stored on land, what's stored in permafrost. These are really big numbers, but compared to the ocean, they really dwarf. So that is the reason that we need to look at the carbon. And there are reasons to believe that the flux of anthropogenic carbon to the ocean is going to change in the future. It definitely will change as soon as we start reducing emissions, which I really hope that we will do. That will, I mean, the uptake is driven by that increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's the big hammer that beats on the ocean. If that big hammer gets smaller, the ocean uptake is going to be less. So if you don't understand, we cannot explain what is happening, the people of the earth will be kind of asking themselves, hey, if we stop the emissions, reduce the emissions, and still carbon dioxide going up in the atmosphere, what's happening? And we're going to have the answer. We're going to be able to look at that and say, this is the answer. The storage and the uptake of carbon going to change. So what to observe? So look at the three world maps to the right. The top one is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide at the ocean surface. So if that is higher than the atmosphere, the outgassing is going to happen. The carbon is going to go from the ocean to the atmosphere. And that is what's shown in the middle world map. The red means outgassing, typically upwelling regions. And the blue ones area, like the North Atlantic, but also Southern Ocean, is where the carbon goes in to the ocean. And the lower world map is the storage. And then it's important to realize that there's two processes going on. First of all, they have to get the carbon from the atmosphere to the ocean surface, and then you have to get that ocean surface water down to the deep ocean, where it's stored for hundreds of years. And that is what's shown in the last world map. And the storage here is very much in the Southern Ocean again, but in the North Atlantic. That's where the carbon is stored for hundreds of years. And the left here is just a few pictures of looking at some tools we have to observe carbon. So you can look at the fluxes here. There's a lower graph. So we have a couple of autonomous vehicles, sail drones and wave drones. They are powered by wind or waves, and they are getting electricity by the sun, right? And they can measure carbon dioxide. We also have the cargo vessels, commercial vessels that can put CO2 sensors on them. But we also have technology now to put that on much smaller vessels like this sailboat here. So these are really exciting things. And I could probably put a picture of a mooring here where you can have CO2 measurements on one site over a long time. But if you look at the storage of carbon in the interior ocean, you much more relied on research vessels. And the picture there shows a CTD, a device that takes water samples from the depth, and you take that up in a lab and you run samples on that. But the middle picture there is showing a Argo float. So we do have the biogeochemical Argo that can measure some variables that can tell you a lot about carbon in the times when there are no ships out there. And that is actually much, the most of the time there's no ships out there. So I just tell you these are the two aspects, flux across the surface and storage in the interior ocean, and some tools. We know how to do it. We have done it for many years. We have data management ideas. We know how that is done. We just need sustainability, long-term funding, and scaling up. And I think, Anya, you're going to talk much more about exactly that. Go ahead.
Thanks, Toste. Thanks for the great primer on ocean carbon observation.
Don't you want me to introduce you?
Oh, absolutely.
Because people don't know you. I know they know you probably, but
I just wanted to add my Dalhousie University affiliation to the list.
yes, absolutely. And I was about to say that you're not only the CEO and scientific director of this Ocean Frontier Institute that produced the beautiful video we saw at the beginning, but also the associate vice president for research for the oceans at Dalhousie University in Canada, and the second co-chair of GOOSE, together with Toste Tanhua. And you have a PhD in biological oceanography and from the University of British Columbia, and then you worked at WHOI and Victoria University in New Zealand. Is that correct, or did I forget an essential part?
Well, I spent about 15 years in Australia as an engineering professor, and then was the head of biological oceanography at the Alfred Wegener Institute for a few years, and then came to Canada.
Excellent. We're listening to you, Anya.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for Toste for, did I just go backwards instead of forwards? I think I did. No, that's correct. So it's exciting to see that colleagues are recognizing the importance of getting something done and starting somewhere to build solution. And we're recognizing that nations and industries and communities can't manage effective climate adaptation and their net zero strategies without good climate forecasts. And the climate modelers are telling us that extreme events are becoming less and less easy to predict. And part of that is because we don't have enough ocean data. So ocean data becomes absolutely the critical link in getting us from where we are now to excellent climate forecasts that will really help us for communities and nations getting where they need to go on their net zero goals. We also have, as was mentioned this morning by Ambassador Thompson in the Canada Pavilion, marine carbon dioxide removal, which is a burgeoning set of startups, really, not industries really per se as yet. And we know that they cannot responsibly and credibly scale and sell carbon credits, and they certainly can't get to the gigaton removal that we need, according to the IPCC, without really good integrated ocean scale observations. And we've had the conversations with many of the startups that, in fact, they're all in denial about scale up. Scale up is something hard, and as soon as you get offshore, you go from a teacup to a tank, and from a tank to an embayment, and from an embayment to the open ocean, where the gigaton scale will actually happen. You start to hit oceanography that becomes more complex, more 3- and 4-dimensional, and you absolutely urgently need excellent ocean observations to do that. And without that, you're not going to get it right. And we all risk fraudulence. And that's the big scare, because on land, carbon credits have seen to be fraudulent, and it's got a lot of people into a lot of nasty trouble. And that's what we don't want to happen in the ocean. And we also need to keep the public on side. And we know that there have been some real pushback from coastal communities saying we don't want stuff dumped in our ocean, and that's fair enough. They should know what's going on and they should understand it, so we need to communicate it, and to communicate it, we need to measure it. So the solution that we started with, and I was just talking to a group of goose experts in ocean carbon, the IOCCP panel, our biogeochemistry panel on Monday. And they said to me, we understand why you want to start with the North Atlantic, but let's start actually first with the whole ocean. And let's think about what we need to scale up to the real climate targets. And then now let's zoom in to the North Atlantic and say, we're going to start here because we have excellent observation from many observing nations that already work here. And we have the potential for collaboration. We've got Germany, England, Germany, the UK, France, and Canada right on this panel, for example. So the concept of the North Atlantic Carbon Observatory, or NACO, is to create an example to show the world what ocean observation can be, and then scale up to the global ocean. The idea is to bring together nations, scientists, and observation networks to do the 2 critical big tasks: improve climate forecasts and enable responsible marine carbon dioxide removal. And we're going to do that in collaboration with the Global Ocean Observing System through something called the Carbon Exemplar. The Carbon Exemplar under the UN Decade will be a design hub where we're going to bring scientists together to create the best possible design for ocean observation. So we start with the North Atlantic and then scale to the world. And then we go to build the infrastructure to scale up, fill gaps, and link internationally. And from there, we move to a different space. So what we need first to do then is to start with observation networks that already exist in the North Atlantic. And I believe, Ed, you're going to talk a little bit about that. And there are fabulous observation networks in the North Atlantic, but they are declining. And a recent report from Dorothy Backer, I believe, showed that the ocean observations are in real, not just in real or any terms, they are actually declining. They've gone down about 20 or 30% over the last few years. And that's because nations are no longer investing as much as they need to. And in fact, they need to scale up not a little bit, but by orders of magnitude if we're going to get to the scale we need. And that means we need more visibility, more buy-in from governments, but also buy-in from nations and from industry. So then the very first step is to leverage what we have, enhance those networks with more sensor capacity, complement those with new observational networks that are driven by the experts, driven by the global ocean observing system experts who come together internationally to make these decisions together, and then complement with new observational networks as needed and as funded, and then integrate the data across all the networks to make them available to nations. So that's a big ask. And that requires a whole bunch of things. It requires, first of all, this co-design piece, which will be nested in the Global Ocean Observing System, where we really bring the experts together to say what can be done. We use modelers to help iterate what's the critical scales at which we need to invest and measure. We then need a governance system internationally, and that again comes to the intergovernmental system and bringing nations together to have the conversation on what does governments actually look like for a system like this. One might cast ourselves back to the International Space Station, where nations came together to talk about investing in infrastructure for the global good. Each of them held on to their own infrastructure, but they put it together and they linked it together for the common good. Now, of course, this isn't a single spot space station sort of idea, but the governance might bear some resemblance there. And because we're friends around the North Atlantic, we may be able to do that effectively in a way that other parts of the world might be more challenging. And then, of course, the finance. And we have a few where we've been discussing with some of the international insurance organizations and with philanthropists and with banks. What does it take to lift something like this? The scale that we think it needs to be done. And so we're not really at the stage of fundraising for this in any way. We're at the stage of asking what needs to be done to make it happen. And we're getting the first few answers now. So first, we get the UN industry, you get the UN interested through GOOSE, building intergovernmental impact, and then we also try and get the world interested, and that's where the North Atlantic Carbon Observatory, based at the Ocean Frontier Institute, will build this high-level awareness. And I'll hand it over
to the virtual speaker.
To Monsieur Rickles.
Yes, so Wilfried Rickles, do you hear us?
I hear you very well.
And we hear you too. That's fantastic. So you're a professor of carbon dioxide removals economics at the University of Kiel in Germany, and you're also the director of the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. So you're heading the research center on global commons and climate policy. You have a postdoc at UC Berkeley and UC San Diego. And you are going to talk about economy to us. So you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I actually cannot see how the slides process.
So maybe we have to do that for you. So just tell us.
So then I start with my first slide, please.
Do you see it? Because we
no,
see the first slide.
There is one. Yeah, that's perfect. So being an economist, we are trying to put a value on the ocean carbon sink. Before you do that, you have to be very clear that the open ocean sink is a global common. That does not mean attributing credits in the first place, but that we have no monetary flows on a credit system doesn't mean it has no value. In contrast, just to have the concepts clear, coastal carbon sink is partly manageable, particularly via blue carbon habitat preservation and increasingly according to various marine CDR methods. And there you have then country-specific wealth contribution to the global wealth. And most importantly, and that was already stressed before, that once the sink is weakening, that means our remaining budgets, which are already tiny anyway, are shrinking further, and then it comes to considerable monetary flows. Next slide, please.
We have it.
I hope you see that slide.
Yes.
Exactly. So you have in principle two approach. The left-hand side, you look at how much damage is avoided by the ocean sink. And the right-hand side, you look at how much additional abatement cost you would have if the ocean sink weakens. And you can do these calculations. And of course, then also calculate how much market prices would react once you start bringing in credits from coastal blue carbon and emergency methods. Also, it means for carbon prices and emission trading systems if the ocean sinks, weakens. And that we did in part in a project jointly with Toste. Next slide, please. So we looked at the wealth redistribution from coastal blue carbon ecosystems. And you can put in the next slide if possible. And we calculated how you can assess the anthropogenic ocean carbon sink from an historic perspective, because the ocean is already taking up anthropogenic carbon for a long time. And of course, I'm not going here in that details, but you can, with these frameworks, do such kind of simply back of the envelope calculations, taking here the global total cumulative ocean sink in gigaton C from the global carbon budget, and then an estimate for the avoided damage. So of course, I took an estimate from our study. We end up there with an aggregated value of the cumulative ocean sink of $65 trillion till the year 2018. And maybe we can deepen these kind of value assessments and further in the discussion. And I hand over to the next panelist.
Thank you, Wilfried. So we are now at Oceanography Center in Southampton. You have a research background in physical oceanography, specializing with a PhD in oceanography from Bangor University. And you participated in several research expeditions and serve on a number of national and international advisory bodies. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So just wanted to recap the key point that the ocean has been uptaking carbon very significantly, and over the last 60 years, the rate of uptake would appear to have trebled. But there are also very large uncertainties despite the increase in data availability. Discrepancy between the best estimates with statistics in the observations. This is a picture of some of the observations that are made by the UK scientific community as part of a funding line which is intended to be relatively long-term and ongoing, but it is refreshed every 5 years. There are 4 research institutes contribute to this observing contribution to the global ocean observing system in the North Atlantic. The picture shows a couple of things. Firstly, the Atlantic is an important place to measure carbon because it has water is formed and sinks, and that is taking carbon out of the surface layers as well as also taking oxygen. 3 research institutions. Key players in this are the funding agencies who basically don't like doing this because it's a long-term commitment of research funding. And so there's continually hard work to is not just measuring multiple things, and so there's a lot of cross collaboration is necessary because carbon is not the only thing. But you can see here a variety of international collaborations in programs that are actually making measurements in the water of carbon, and you can see multiple partners, US, Canada, European players, really important in doing that. The other thing is that you need to be in this for the long game. This is one aspect of the biological carbon pump, where a site has been maintained for almost 40 years off the southwest of the UK. And you can see in here tremendous variability in the flux of carbon getting from the surface ocean right down into the deep layers and indeed onto the sea floor. And there are all sorts of issues with this data set. There are only some years where there is complete data marked with the stars there. So there's real practical issues in maintaining these long time series. But you can see huge variability in this particular aspect of the carbon cycle, meaning that one really needs to sustain these kinds of observations for the long term. Research vessels have an enormous potential in terms of measuring surface carbon. as well as ships of opportunity, which Toste referred to. Ships of opportunity are quite a problematic tool because the routing of them varies sometimes without very much notice. Research vessels are also less predictable in where they go, but they go to some of the oceans that are parts of the ocean that commercial vessels don't go to. But again, you would think this was a straightforward thing to do, is to measure carbon from surface from research vessels. It technically is not at all on how to get reliable funding to maintain these long-term infrastructural observations. And then we're moving into new technologies. This is the biogeochemical Argo float program, which has the ability to start to provide estimates of some of the inorganic carbon. But there are some assumptions there because not all of the carbonate parameters can be measured from Argo floats at the moment. We can measure pH from it. And so we're making assumptions about some of the other variables in order to get at some of the inorganic carbon. And you can also get, with some of the sensors on there, some of the biological floats as well. The absolutely crucial issue here is about how to maintain the calibration of these. And this is going to involve cross-calibrating with ship-based observations as well. And then looking into the future, we're looking at increasingly towards autonomous underwater vehicles. This is a particular one that we're using and planning to do a fully autonomous shore-to-shore mission, Iceland to Scotland, without using ships, as a way of, but on a platform that's capable of quite a big payload. And therefore for more accurate sensors. So again, the kind of partnership that is necessary to develop here is with the engineers and technologists who are able to look forward to some of the equipment that we may need to make these very long-term sustained observations that are necessary to do, but technically and funding-wise continue to be very difficult and challenging to make.
Thank you, Ed. We move now to our last panelist and to the end of the first round of these discussions. So, Antoine Petit, you're a computer scientist and a professor originally, but most importantly today you're the chairman and CEO of the French CNRS, the National Center for Scientific Research, which is France's largest multidisciplinary research organization and one of the major players in terms of contribution to EU-funded projects. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of,
Does it work? Yes. First of all, I would like to apologize because I feel myself like a bit the outsider of the panel. I'm not a specialist of oceans, as you explained. So let me just make some global considerations. CNRS is strongly involved in all ocean studies for years, for decades now. Mainly is in partnerships in France with French university, but also with IFREMER. And I see François, who is supervise me and controls that I will not say stupid things. But more seriously, for us, is clear, as you probably know, France has a huge number of square kilometers of oceans due to all our islands that we have everywhere. And we pay attention to that. And for us, as I said in the previous panel, observation is absolutely key. We need this observation as was explained perfectly by Toste. We need this observation in order to have these twin models, which are so important for the future, so important for helping decision makers to play with what is scenarios, which are absolutely key. But also, from our point of view, this observation are key to develop interdisciplinarity and pluridisciplinarity. And clearly, I think we all agree on the fact that now, if we want to understand and to study oceans, we need skills from very various fields. And precisely, observation is something, and data is something that scientists from different fields can share. It's not the only way to put together people from different disciplines, but clearly is a key point. And so for decades, we are involved in observing among the that we have used, or most of the infrastructure we use are in fact European infrastructures, and that we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate not only in Europe but also with partners from all over the world. And clearly, we should share this information. And that's why CNRS is a strong defender of open science and open data. From my point of view, it's absolutely key. We cannot keep the data. Each of us cannot keep the data. That's sometimes it's stupid and from a scientific point of view. And so, structures, this involve in particular the one mentioned by Ed already concerning Argo, through for what is called ICOS, Integrated Carbon Observation System, which has a label of ERIC, European Structures, which is dedicated to measuring carbon dynamic on Earth, encompassing three components: atmosphere, continental surface, and oceans. It's also true for probably one of the most interesting or significant, supported by independent, scientifically based observing infrastructure to monitor the impact and effects of any of the proposed methods. And CNRS, as I said, has been involved for decades in such infrastructure, and we are convinced that we have to continue to do that, of course, but even in a more, if possible, more international perspective, with really the idea to share the data, to push scientists of different fields to collaborate, and with the idea that at the end we will produce scenario, we will produce informations, knowledge that will help decision makers to make the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine. So before we give the floor to the questions from the audience, I would like to ask a couple of questions more to our panelists. I suppose the first one would go to you, Toste, because you said ocean scientists have been working on this for decades, and you have everything. So what is still missing? Why isn't it happening?
Good question. So we have the tools, and we're improving the tools, and we're making it better. Autonomous surface vehicles is this is not working, right? Oh, it is. Okay, so the autonomous surface vehicles is a new tool, and we have new sensors. So we are improving. But that comes back to what Ed was mentioning, right? We are really struggling to maintain a system because we are funded by research agencies, and they're not so much interested in funding things for 20, 30 years, and it's probably not their duty to do so. But we don't have a strong ocean agency in most countries, like you have a strong meteorological agency that puts up stations because we need these stations to get a better weather forecast for tomorrow. We even support putting up stations in Tuvalu in South Pacific, because that's going to impact the weather we have in over Europe. To know what the weather is in Tuvalu, right? I mean, it's amazing, the interconnectivity, but it's the same in the ocean. And we need to make that shift from that research, curiosity-driven research, which we still need to do, of course, to a system which can deliver long-term information based on sustained observations, sustained modeling, and all that kind of things that goes with it. And NACO is one pilot to see how we can implement such a system by rich countries like France and UK and Germany and Canada and US, not to forget, of course, and Norway and others. I don't want to be, but this is a place where if we can do it somewhere, that's going to be the place. And it happens to be a place that is super important for carbon.
Excellent. We are touching about the question of funding. So I would like to ask Wilfried a question also. So you are an economist, and why does an economist have an interest in ocean carbon sinks? So what do you think is the reason behind?
Well, from a resource economist perspective, it's quite interesting because climate change is there a to circumvent this inertia or to deal with this inertia in the system, so to say. And on the other hand, that's what we do. That's what things cost, where you cannot observe a price. And I think that was something Toste and me together in this project.
Yeah, I think it's a very useful information, definitely. Anya, you presented the NACO and you explained the scaling up, and we heard from all the speakers the necessity of partnership, cooperation. How do we engage with the actors in other regions? How do we make this exemplar a global initiative?
I think we have to do that in part through the Global Ocean Observing System. There's no question that we already have networks that work internationally to discuss at a high level what ocean observation should look like, and UNESCO. And those are important conversations. Ultimately, we have to reach those who are funding national infrastructures and bring nations together to have that conversation. And as an example, the World Meteorological Organization will be mandating now surface ocean observation as part of their global greenhouse gas watch. Now, that's a new thing for the ocean observation community. Everyone's quite excited because now there's going to be a mandate from the UN for oceans to measure surface carbon. The challenge we have, and the assumption is a little bit, the WMO has been great at getting meteorological observation up off the ground, right? So the WMO's mandate's obviously going to be a silver bullet for ocean observation. And the problem is, of course, everybody understands that weather's important. We all probably checked our apps before we came here to Dubai. Did everyone, policymaker, every mayor, every prime minister knows why weather is important? The ocean is less clear. So I think it's not going to be a silver bullet for ocean observation. We need nations to step up and say the ocean is critically important for our climate models and for the future of our economies. And we need to find a way to bring that together. And I think NACO is an opportunity for that. I don't think we've realized yet the importance. We haven't brought it together yet at the policy, the governance scale, that it'll need to have the right impact.
And from our national representatives, let's say, how do you see this? How do you see this new role that comes to you to engage in such a process in the global greenhouse gas watch of WMO and the more international global initiative that we're talking about today?
Yes. So the issue, of course, is that National Met Service, WMO member, and some of it will work through to be focused on the exclusive economic zones where there's a legal responsibility for them to do that. And they do actually make quite a lot of observations. It tends to be disconnected from the rest of the global system. And then there's these scientific research agencies who actually, beyond those national jurisdictions and they have no actual explicit mandates and are very keen to maintain the flow of funding for new science ideas and don't like funding infrastructures. So I think this is always going to be a challenge when it hits the national level. And that's, I think, a key problem that we need to do. Part of the answer to that is getting better linkages, which is happening now between GEOS and the national agencies. But I also think that probably an important dimension of this is that somehow these nationally defined contributions that are being made in processes like this actually need to be coupled with observations, mandates to make the observations to verify them, because only then does the rubber hit the road, I think.
So, Antoine.
Very often I explain to friends that because France likes to be a big country, which is true also, of course. Clearly, now national fundings are necessary but not sufficient. And we, for instance, we push with some others that for the next European framework program, then European infrastructures should be supported by this framework program, because it's also a magnet for talent and for scientists. So I think we don't have to oppose the national fundings to European or international fundings. Both are necessary, but clearly if we think only at a national level, we will not succeed. That's like for science. We all agree that we need cooperation for science, and I think now fundings are in fact too expensive. Fundings to have data 1 year is useless. We need long series of data, so we need sustainable fundings, and these fundings right now, in particular at the European level, can only be reached through international or through European cooperations. Probably the situation is different for China or for US because they are much bigger. But at least at the European level, we really need this cooperation also in terms of fundings.
Thank you. I would like now to ask maybe if the audience has questions. I don't see anything. I don't have information about the online audience and if there is access to questions. But if someone, then I don't know, maybe we need to share the mics.
Thank you. Hi, Alice Aiken from Dalhousie University. My question is for Antoine. What do you think the appetite is for the other federal funders to do something like this? You know, CNRS has always been a leader, but how are the other countries responding?
It's always complicated to answer for the others. Well, clearly, my feeling at least in Germany, they share our view. Probably it's more complicated in Europe with the smallest country, which has much less money, and we expect much more from European point of view. But I think the big science, I have the feeling that at least for the big centers like CNRS, whatever it means, all agree. Even it's interesting. I think that we are the biggest centers in Europe, but we are also convinced that we have to share. It's interesting because we could see, okay, there are the big players, and so they can, each of them is big enough to do his research alone. We are convinced that we have to share. Sometimes it's more complicated with the smallest countries, as I said. We really expect more from the European level, and we are not really to spend some money. And when Europe sees that, says, okay, but if they don't want to invest, why should we invest? So really, I think it's a win-win game to have national investments, putting together in order to have a leverage effect and to attract European fundings, but also we don't speak of it, private fundings. I think that's also clearly a key issue.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah. Well, maybe I can add a question, and it's going more mainly to Wilfried Ricketts. My name is Werner Kutsch. I'm the director of ICOS. That was already mentioned. Wilfried, you mentioned this number, 65 trillion euros is the value of the ocean sink, or is back of the envelope calculation. I suppose that number has a huge error bar. And I think observations can help to reduce this error bar. So could you perhaps reflect a little bit on whether it's 0.0 per mil or 0 per mil or 1 per mil of this 65 billion that needs to be invested to reduce the error bar? I think this could be an angle to argue for the funding.
Did you hear the question, Wilfried?
Yeah, thank you. It's US dollar, not euro. So we had there an error, I think, of 7 trillion. And that was mainly due to the uncertainty in climate change. So kind of price you put in there. So even if it's a bit discouraging now for this discussion, I mean, the main uncertainty is this price. And you can argue for quite different social cost carbon estimates. So if you want to get this number smaller, you would need estimates for the impacts of climate change, I have to say. However, for policy making and is for meaning shit when we are not in the cost-benefit frame, compliance framework, then it's of course relevant to know how much or how large is our remaining budget, and then to ocean observation. I do not have a cost now. What is needed in observations to reduce there's uncertainty for the budgets.
Thank you. We have 1 minute left. Yes, we have a question there.
Hi, my name is Alejandra Navarrete. I'm from the Ocean Foundation, and we have been working for the last 4 years with Mexico, trying to produce an ocean observation system that is national and also a regional hub. And what we have done is we have worked with thinking that countries don't want to pay for monitoring. So we went to the Geographic Institute that they have a mandate in policy and legislation to do the work and have accounting on forest things. So we opened a place for oceans, and what we have been working with them through UN is in the ocean accounts. So there's an ocean. I think we also think that monitoring and data, we started that because we wanted to have information on ocean acidification. And then we found out that the IOC UNESCO had some notes that they had been funding for many years, but there's no enough information. So we also work with Cuba, US, and Mexico on the Gulf of Mexico also for observations and information. What we have created is these communities of practice for ocean acidification. So I think that we have to put both together. We did a very big diagnostic of all the academic institutions, all of the information they have, that a lot of the it's in drawers. So we have to find a way to collaborate with the academics to bring that information. And also, another work we have been doing is with the senators and legislators to tell them the importance of having information for policy making, for in case of alerts, early warning systems, and things like that. So I think this is some effort that we're doing, maybe some at national level, regional levels, and you're trying to do it at international. So we'll have to find a way to collaborate.
Any comment on this need for cooperation? I think it was clear.
I think it's an obvious one, right? And it's also North Atlantic, if you in the Caribbean. So absolutely, let's talk.
Okay, so I think we need to close now. I will just finish by an advertising. Discussions will continue also around NACO and things like that Wednesday on 6th of December at 3:30 p.m. So put that in your calendar. And I would like to thank our panelists, including Wilfried on the screen, and you can give them a round of applause. Thank you.